You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. You will hear a man telephoning to ask about a job in a hotel. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. You will see that there is an example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Hello, West Bay Hotel. Can I help you?
Oh, good morning. I'm ringing about your advertisement in the Evening Gazette.
Is that the one for temporary staff?
That's right.
The advertisement is for temporary staff, so temporary has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Hello, West Bay Hotel. Can I help you?
Oh, good morning. I'm ringing about your advertisement in the Evening Gazette.
Is that the one for temporary staff?
That's right.
Yes, I'm afraid the person who's dealing with that isn't in today, but I can give you the main details if you like.
Yes, please. Could you tell me what kind of staff you're looking for?
We're looking for waiters at the moment. There was one post for a cook, but that's already been taken.
Oh, right. What are the hours of work?
There are 2 different shifts. There is a day shift from 7 to 2 and a late shift from 4 till 11.
And can people choose which one they want to do?
Not normally, because everyone would choose the day shift, I suppose. You alternate from one week to another.
OK, I'm just writing all this down. What about time off?
You get 1 day off, and I think you can negotiate which one you want. It's more or less up to you, but it has to be the same one every week.
Do you know what the rates of pay are?
Yes, I've got them here. You get £5.50 an hour, and that includes a break.
Do I have to go home to eat, or...?
You don't have to. You can get a meal in the hotel if you want to, and there's no charge for it, so you might as well.
Oh, good. Yes, so let's see. I get £231 a week.
You'd also get tips. Our guests tend to be quite generous.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
Is there a uniform? What about clothes?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. You need to wear a white shirt, just a plain one, and dark trousers. You know, not green or anything like that. And we don't supply those.
That's okay, I've got trousers. I just have to buy a couple of shirts. What about anything else? Do I need a waistcoat or anything?
You have to wear a jacket, but the hotel lends you that.
I see. One last thing. I don't know what the starting date is.
Just a minute. I think it's sometime around the end of June. Yes, the 28th, in time for the summer.
That's great. I'm available from the 10th.
Oh, good. Well, if you can call again, you need to speak to the service manager. Her name's Jane Irwin. That's URWIN, and she'll probably arrange to meet you.
OK, and when's the best time to ring?
Could you call tomorrow? She usually starts checking the rooms at midday, so before then if you can, so she'll have more time to chat. I'll just give you her number because she's got a direct line.
Thanks.
It's 832-009.
823-009.
832.
Oh, OK. Yes, I'll do that.
And by the way, she will ask you for a reference, so you might like to be thinking about that. You know, just someone who knows you and can vouch for you.
Yes, no problem. Well, thanks very much for your help.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 2.
Section 2. You will hear a woman talking to a group of college students about volunteering to help other people. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
Good morning. My name's Lucy Crittenden, and I'm the Director of Operations for an organisation that arranges volunteering in this part of the country. I'm hoping I can persuade one or two of you to become volunteers yourselves. Let me start by briefly explaining what we mean by volunteering. Volunteers are teenagers and adults who choose to spend some time unpaid helping other people in some way. Most volunteers devote 2 or 3 hours to this every week, while a few do much more. The people they help may have physical or behavioural difficulties, for example. Volunteers can do all sorts of things, depending on their own abilities and interests. If they're supporting a family that's struggling, for example, they may be able to give them tips on cooking, or recommend how to plan their budget, or how to shop sensibly on their income. They might even do some painting or wallpapering, perhaps alongside any members of the family who are able to do it. Or even do some babysitting, so that parents can go out for a while. The benefit from volunteering isn't only for the people being helped. Volunteers also gain from it. They're using their skills to cope with somebody's mental or physical ill health, and volunteering may be a valuable element of their CV when they're applying for jobs. Employers usually look favourably on someone who's given up time to help others. Significantly, most volunteers feel that what they're doing gives them a purpose in their lives. And in my opinion, they're lucky in that respect, as many people don't have that feeling.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
Now I'd like to tell you what some of our volunteers have said about what they do, to give you an idea of the range of ways in which they can help people. Habib supports an elderly lady who's beginning to show signs of dementia. Once a week they, along with other elderly people, go to the local community centre where a group of people come in and sing. The songs take the listeners back to their youth, and for a little while they can forget the difficulties that they face now. Our volunteer Consuela is an amazing woman. She has difficulty walking herself, but she doesn't let that stop her. She helps a couple of people with similar difficulties who had almost stopped walking altogether. By using herself as an example, Consuela encourages them to walk more and more. Min visits a young man who lives alone and can't leave his home on his own, so he hardly ever saw anyone. But together they go out to the cinema or to see friends the young man hadn't been able to visit for a long time. Tanya visits an elderly woman once a week. When the woman found out that Tanya is a professional dressmaker, she got interested. Tanya showed her some soft toys she'd made, and the woman decided to try it herself. And now she really enjoys it and spends hours making toys. They're not perhaps up to Tanya's standard yet, but she gains a lot of pleasure from doing it. Alexi is a volunteer with a family that faces a number of difficulties. By calmly talking over possible solutions with family members, he's helping them to realise that they aren't helpless and that they can do something themselves to improve their situation. This has been great for their self-esteem. And the last volunteer I'll mention, though there are plenty more, is Juba. She volunteers with a teenage girl with learning difficulties who wasn't very good at talking to other people. Juba's worked very patiently with her, and now the girl is far better at expressing herself and at understanding other people. OK, I hope that's given you an idea of what volunteering is all about. Now I'd like to talk to you about...
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 3.
Section 3. Study Options. You will hear a professor talking to her student about his study options. Before you listen, you have 30 seconds to read questions 21 to 24.
Come in, Rangi.
Thank you, Professor Anderson.
I've been meaning to contact you, but I just got back last night.
Where have you been?
Conferences in Massachusetts and New York.
For physics?
Yes.
Great. I'm looking forward to attending conferences one day.
I imagine that won't be so far away. I was extremely impressed with your classical mechanics exam. In fact, you were one of only 2 students out of 180 to get an A+.
Wow. I really did enjoy the course.
So how can I help you?
I'm sorry to say it's a bit of a long story. You see, I've had to rethink my studies completely, and I wonder if I'm making the right decision.
You're doing 2 degrees, aren't you? Science and arts.
I was doing 2. I've decided to focus on science.
Oh?
It all came about because I wanted to study abroad for a year. I was thinking about Edinburgh. Firstly, I sought approval from the maths and physics departments. I wanted to take quantum mechanics and computer simulations at Edinburgh.
Those are third-year courses, right?
Yeah. So I received approval from maths and physics. The stumbling block was the higher authority, the science faculty. When I submitted my application, it was rejected.
What?
It turns out that students who study abroad for a year can only do first or second year courses or third year courses in a subject that's not their major.
I've never heard that before.
Needless to say, the lecturers who approved my transfer hadn't either, and nor does the regulation appear on the science faculty website.
That'd be right. This faculty is disorganised.
So then I thought I'd take arts courses at Edinburgh and leave the third year maths until I came back. I quickly got approval for second year history and philosophy from the arts faculty.
When are you heading off?
That's just it. During this process, I began to think carefully about my studies. To be honest, the arts courses I've done were less challenging than the science ones, so I've decided to drop arts.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have 30 seconds to read questions 25 to 30.
Where do I figure in all this?
The first week after I'd made my decision, I felt fine. Without doing the arts courses, I could finish my science degree earlier. But this week, I've had some doubts. When I started the 2 degrees, lecturers in the science faculty assured me that these days scientists need a rounded education, which they get if they take some arts courses. I was even told I'd learn to write and think better if I did philosophy.
I do think the claims made by some lecturers are dubious.
Then there's the fact that now I'm going to be stuck here next year. I was so excited about going to Europe.
It is disappointing to give that up. Still, the reason I wanted to contact you, Rangi, is that I'm looking for students to work 6 hours a week in my lab. It's paid work, not highly paid, but probably better than I'm working in a bar. Also, we've just bought a new laser, which you'd learn to use.
That sounds excellent.
As to going abroad, why not do your postgraduate studies in the US? There's some amazing physics being done in Massachusetts. If you like, I can send you the papers from the conference.
Thanks.
Of course, I'd be sad to lose you if you did go abroad, but an A+ student like you has a very good chance of winning a major scholarship.
Goodness, I've never even considered that.
Personally, I think committing yourself to science is the way to go.
Thanks, Professor Anderson. You've taken a load off my mind. Now I don't have to deal with Hegel or Leibniz. I've plenty of time to read those conference papers.
You now have 30 seconds to check your answers. That is the end of section 3.
Part 4. You will hear a lecturer on a fashion design course introducing the subject of hand knitting, which involves making things like woolen jumpers and scarves. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to look at an important creative activity, and that's hand knitting. Ancient knitted garments have been found in many different countries, showing that knitting is a global activity with a long history. When someone says the word knitting, we might well picture an elderly person, a grandmother perhaps, sitting by the fire, knitting garments for themselves or other members of the family. It's a homely image, but one that may lead you to feel that knitting is an activity of the past. And indeed, during the previous decade, it was one of the skills that was predicted to vanish from everyday life. For although humans have sewn and knitted their own clothing for a very long time, many of these craft-based skills went into decline when industrial machines took over, mainly because they were no longer passed down from one generation to another. However, that's all changing, and interest in knitting classes in many countries is actually rising, as more and more people are seeking formal instruction in the skill. With that trend, we're also seeing an increase in the sales figures for knitting equipment. So, why do people want to be taught to knit at a time when a machine can readily do the job for them? The answer is that knitting, as a handicraft, has numerous benefits for those doing it. Let's consider what some of these might be. While many people knitted garments in the past because they couldn't afford to buy clothes, it's still true today that knitting can be helpful if you're experiencing economic hardship. If you have several children who all need warm winter clothes, knitting may save you a lot of money. And the results of knitting your own clothes can be very rewarding, even though the skills you need to get going are really quite basic, and the financial outlay is minimal. But the more significant benefits in today's world are to do with well-being. In a world where it's estimated that we spend up to 9 hours a day online, doing something with our hands that is craft-based makes us feel good. It releases us from the stress of a technological, fast-paced life. Now, let's look back a bit to early knitting activities. In fact, no one really knows when knitting first began, but archaeological remains have disclosed plenty of information for us to think about. One of the interesting things about knitting is that the earliest pieces of clothing that have been found suggest that most of the items produced were round rather than flat. Discoveries from the 3rd and 4th centuries in Egypt show that things like socks and gloves that were needed to keep hands and feet warm were knitted in one piece using 4 or 5 needles. That's very different from most knitting patterns today, which only require 2. What's more, the very first needles people used were hand-carved out of wood and other natural materials, like bone, whereas today's needles are largely made of steel or plastic and make that characteristic clicking sound when someone's using them. Ancient people knitted using yarns made from linen, hemp, cotton and wool, and these were often very rough on the skin. The spinning wheel, which allowed people to make finer yarns and produce much greater quantities of them, led to the dominance of wool in the knitting industry, often favoured for its warmth. Another interesting fact about knitting is that because it was practised in so many parts of the world, for so many purposes, regional differences in style developed. This visual identity has allowed researchers to match bits of knitted clothing that have been unearthed over time to the region from which the wearer came, or the job that he or she did. As I've mentioned, knitting offered people from poor communities a way of making extra money while doing other tasks. For many centuries, it seems, men, women and children took every opportunity to knit, for example, while watching over sheep, walking to market, or riding in boats. So, let's move on to take...
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4. That is the end of the listening test. In the IELTS test, you would now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet.